Welcome to Library Pass and Comics Plus. My name is John Shableski, and this is our Publisher Spotlight. Today's featured publisher is Dark Horse Comics, and our guest today is Mark Bernardi. Mark, you're the VP of Book Trade Sales and Digital, correct?
That's right. Hi, John. Yes, that's correct.
And you've been there for just a little while.
Yeah, you could say that. I've been there since 1996. And yeah, I've done a lot of things at Dark Horse over that time, mostly in the sales and licensing parts of our, aspects of our company. And I've been in this role managing book sales and digital sales for about 4.5 years.
So prior to your arrival at Dark Horse, you've had other book-centric.
Kind of. The job I had for a few years immediately before Dark Horse, back in the early days of book publishing, so long ago, was in the magazine business. So
Okay.
Originally, when I came to Dark Horse, that was the connection that they were had just fairly recently at that time had started selling comics through the newsstand distribution avenues, which are like the grocery stores, bookstores. I'm talking about the floppy comics,
Right.
and so that was where my experience was. I had worked for a magazine distributor, and prior to that, I had worked in bookstores for many years during college and after college. So yeah, I mean, in one form or another, I've been in publishing my entire career.
Right. So with Dark Horse, as a publisher, Dark Horse Comics has been around since I think 1980. Is that correct?
1986.
1986. Okay. There are some surprises here. I don't think people associate Dark Horse Comics with some major film events. Can you touch on some of that history?
Yeah, sure. Before I worked at Dark Horse, or to be honest, even had heard of Dark Horse, the founder of Dark Horse, Mike Richardson, who's still the president and publisher, a few years after the company started getting into the movie production business, and the very first Dark Horse film was called Dr. Giggles, which I happened to see in the theater, having
I remember
years before I had any connection to Dark Horse. I happened to see it in the theater. That was the first one, and then very shortly thereafter, in 1994, Dark Horse had two big hits. One was Time Cop, a film with Jean-Claude Van Damme, and most notably, The Mask with Jim Carrey. That was obviously a huge hit, still a favorite among people around the world. And then over the years, other ones, perhaps most notably, are the Hellboy films. Hellboy is a property, a series that with many spin-offs that Dark Horse has been publishing for over 25 years. Mike Mignola, the creator of Hellboy, was one of the earlier creators that started working with Mike and Dark Horse. In the last couple of years, we've had a humongous success with The Umbrella Academy. That's a series on Netflix, which by most accounts, most that I've read, was their most streamed show of the last couple of years, with the exception of Stranger Things.
Right.
And that Umbrella Academy is a comic series created by Gerard Way and Gabriel Ba that we started publishing in around 2010. And so in that example, in all these examples, these are films or TV series made from a comic that we published. An upcoming show, I believe later this month, that launches on the Sci-Fi Network, is called Resident Alien. That looks to be a really good, fun show starring Alan Tudyk, who is one of those people who I think, a lot of people don't know the name, and then the people who do are humongous fans, because he's a real terrific actor that's been in a lot of sort of, nerd-centric, entertainment. So that's that. And then the flip side of that is very early on in the Dark Horse history, in the late 80s, Dark Horse got into publishing, creating comics um, inspired by entertainment properties. So some notable ones very early on was the Aliens and Aliens versus Predator, which, point of trivia, Dark Horse invented the Aliens versus Predator concept with a series of comics that were then inspired a bunch of movies that um, and so until literally 2 weeks ago, ever since the late 80s, we have been publishing Aliens and Predator comics. Um, a couple years after we started doing that, we got the Star Wars license, and for about 25, 26 years, we were the publisher of Star Wars comics and graphic novels. Um, both of those cases, of course, corporate takeovers being what they are, both of those licenses in recent times went to Marvel uh, due to, Disney buying Lucas, all these things.
Sure.
Other notable ones that have been big successes for us over the years: Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Conan the Barbarian. Um, you know, and currently the biggest series I would say of books that we have that are based on an entertainment property that we've adapted are the Avatar: The Last Airbender graphic novels.
Right.
That's a Nickelodeon show that's been off the air for a number of years, but has a huge cult. It's not even a cult following, just a huge following. And those books have been very popular, strong sellers for us for 10 plus years. But then in the last year, interest has really exploded because the series, along with its sister series, The Legend of Korra, were hit Netflix this spring. Probably between the Netflix effect and the fact that so many, that series tends to appeal to sort of younger YA and younger readers.
Sure.
And so many kids, obviously, with the pandemic and being at home, TV watching was up. And so both digitally and in print, the sales have been unbelievable. And those are, titles that are very, very popular with libraries too, because obviously it's the kind of material that brings a kid in to seek it out. And
Oh, sure. Well, with all the history of the media crossover and the film industry becoming involved in the process, that can be kind of a challenge for a publisher, right? Suddenly you've got this attention from Hollywood for these properties, and that can make things rather interesting for a publisher, correct?
It can, yeah, it can.
And it's
Usually,
wonderful to get exposure like that, but then how do you adapt and manage that response?
mhm, mhm. Well, are you thinking of more of publishing things that perhaps will become, or the
Yeah,
opposite?
that's kind of what I was going after. And with Mike Richardson's early experiences with properties like Mask, that was a story that really still stays out there.
Yeah.
Um,
I would say, it is the case that based on primarily Mike's, or and the people he works, we have an LA office, Dark Horse Entertainment, that um, deals with the film business. And between those folks down there and Mike, if there is the feeling that a certain book that we're considering publishing or a series or what have you has potential for that, that can sort of tip the scales to publishing a book that, say, perhaps, okay, this is from a first time author or, an unknown. It's the kind of book that we don't have big expectations for selling out of the gate. That if you just, based on expectations, maybe we would decline to publish it, but then sometimes, quite often, we do publish it because we feel like the title itself has potential just as a publishing venture in the long term. But also the hope, of course, is well, this seems like it would make a great movie or whatever, and
Right.
and those things take a long time. The series Resident Alien I mentioned earlier that's a kind of an example of that, that it was a series that was really funny, a great concept, and we published for many years with, relatively low sales and low attention to it. But it's great. It's a great concept, and sure enough, eventually it has become a TV show.
Right, right.
And that can happen too with the entertainment, the opposite way, where we're adapting entertainment properties. An example would be The Witcher. The Witcher was first a series of novels and a series of video games, and we got the license to create comics based on the video games, which are very popular, and we've done those for a number of years, and they've been very successful. But we got an extra boost last year when the Witcher TV show hit Netflix. These books that were, good backlist sellers are suddenly, going crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we, like in that specific example, as we often do, we created an omnibus, what we call an omnibus, which is a paperback collecting multiple graphic novels, usually kind of older material. As it's both offers a better value for folks, and also it's just easier to manage 4 titles than 12 and so forth. So
I think Dark Horse gets credit for the omnibus format.
I think so. I mean, the word omnibus, of course, is a word that's been around plenty of time, so it has different meanings for different people, and sometimes we have to remind ourselves internally that, like, hey, we know what we mean by this, but does the world know? But yeah, we've had great success with that. I think I want to say Star Wars were the first series that we started doing omnibuses, due to the fact that after 20 plus years the backlist was enormous and difficult to keep everything in print, and it made a lot of sense to do it that way.
Right. Well, it's going to take us into segueing into the conversation about the library market. And my memory of Dark Horse in the American Library Association conferences, you guys were one of the first 2 publishers to set up camp in what became the Graphic Novel Pavilion. And from that time to today, that's been a mutually beneficial relationship. Every time you guys do the show, it's so different than a Comic-Con because those librarians are giving you information about what they do with your books, right?
Yeah. It's a really it's much different than obviously a trade a trade show, of course, but also like a consumer show where you're trying to sell them something. In this case, it feels more like a partnership. A lot of information sharing. I learn things every time I attend some kind of event like that. Hopefully librarians do too. In my experience, for the last 5 years or so going to these library shows, my experience is that librarians that come up and approach us at the booth tend to paint it in broad strokes. They tend to know very little about comics, or they know more than I do.
Right. It's an
and
either
that's
or.
great because a lot of librarians that are seem to be banging the drum about graphic novels and comics, and of course that's appreciated.
Sure.
I'll tell you, the one thing the only thing that bothers me about the library market is the lack of centralized data on sales, and that's not the librarian's fault.
Nope.
It's an industry-wide bugaboo.
Yeah.
But it's annoying to, at least once a month, I get a question from an author or an editor or one of my colleagues. Hey, what are the library sales on that book? It must be good, right? And it's one of those questions. I feel like this must sound like I'm lying, but I'm telling the truth. I don't know.
Right.
I'm sure it's good. I can take a guess. Certainly, we get a lot of feedback from librarians about title that we're talking about. But that would be my one wish for the library market, was somebody somewhere would come up with some way to aggregate sales.
That data,
the sales channels through which librarians obtain books are so varied, and on such unusual, varying schedules and what have you, that it's really hard. And clearly it's a big part of an important part of our market.
Sure.
Since I've been on board as the vice president, overseeing this stuff, as you said, Michael Martin's my predecessor that was in this role for 20 plus years at Dark Horse. He was very passionate about libraries and sort of led that charge to, be at as many shows as possible, certainly the annual shows, and doing outreach. And when I took over, I felt like, well, look, I want to do that one better. And so we've, over those years, we participate in 2 or 3 librarian targeted webinars each year. We have, I built out, a few years ago, started a newsletter specifically for librarians. And we've got, last time I looked, about 9,000 librarians on the mailing list.
Oh, nice.
Which is great. And another one of the many things I love about librarians is they like to read. So the open rate on our librarian newsletter is far better than any other newsletter we do. And so I wanted to pitch that too. Because we tailor that for librarians. Now, obviously, in theory, every book appeals to all kinds of people. But I try to, select books I think would be of particular interest to librarians for various, whatever reason. We always include, excerpts of books, as many of the books as we can. And of course, library-centric news, such as appearances by authors at an upcoming convention, these webinars, or what have you.
So that interaction with the librarians has helped shape the kind of language you use in describing the books. Early on, well, there still is reference to all ages, but this understanding that there's early readers, middle grade readers, YA, and adult, and that's now finding its way into the education market. Do you have a sense yet of what kind of response you're getting from this? Are you getting any feedback from schools yet? Have you heard anything along those lines?
It's very, it's very anecdotal.
Right.
Certainly at conventions, I've talked to various educators or people in that space. But, again, it's quite possible there's stuff goes on that I'm unaware of just because of the way, the many layers between us and the school. But I'm not really aware of a lot of school pickup. Now we do get a pretty good amount of college, professors reaching out. Hey, can I get a desk copy? Because I'm assigning this graphic novel to my class.
Oh,
Again,
really?
it's anecdotal, my sense is that at least Dark Horse's content, it tends to be the higher grades so far.
Sure.
That picked it up.
I think that's interesting. If we could dive into that for a little bit about the academic interest. Do you feel there's a standard series like Hellboy or BPRD or any of those that fall into that realm that you see more academics doing, requests for?
I would imagine. Again, I'm going off the top of my head here because it is a kind of just sporadic, and honestly, I'm not even aware of some of them. It's sort of like, hey, whoever gets the email handles it, kind of thing. But
gotcha.
I would. It varies a lot. From Frank Miller's Sin City and Hellboy, titles like that are sort of modern classics of the genre or of comics, of their specific genres of comics. And some of the historical stuff we do quite a bit of archives of old historically important comics, such as the EC comics,
right?
Creepy, eerie. Often those are the kind of books that are requested for folks that are, maybe not even necessarily a class about comics, but perhaps a class about censorship or, an American history sort of class. And quite often it's quite sporadic. It's quite random almost. Sometimes it can be surprising because, of course, they don't really typically explain the whole.
Sure, it's just
the curriculum or anything. Yeah. They're just saying, "Hey, I'm using this in a class." So we, But, you know, that said, we do get a lot of requests from schools, you know, elementary and middle schools for, um, you know, donations and information. And often that comes from a teacher saying, hey, I've started a comics club, you know, and I'm using comics to teach. And often the impression I get is it's less official curriculum as it is a teacher kind of trying something,
Right.
and or trying to get a club going, to sort of get some kids involved in reading. It's perhaps a cliche, but you know, comics are really um, a great tool for potentially for to get kids that are reluctant to read. The cliche, reluctant reader seems like a cliche. You know, at this
Sure.
point, however, I think it's completely, you know, like most cliches, there's a bit of truth to it, and I think it's completely true. And I've seen that, you know, in my own life, with, you know, my own kids and kids that you know, friends of theirs, that kids with no interest in reading, but uh, a comic, particularly if it's a comic that's based on some show they love, like Stranger Things, we do comics for, or Avatar, or Minecraft is a one series that we do that is particularly, you know, middle to younger readers. Um, or, you know, Disney, of course, we do a lot of Disney related comics. So um, a lot of those requests from schools are of that nature.
Right.
And you know, we try to, just like with libraries reaching out regarding comic cons or events that they do, um, we always are more than happy to try to, you know, donate some books, and do whatever we can.
Sure. You know, and it's great to hear that kind of response and that you are aware of the buildup of those requests. Um, One of the first things I remember Dark Horse adapting to or adjusting to was the conversations about bindings
Mm,
for books, and that I remember when the Clone Wars series first came out, and hearing Michael Martins in the booth talking with librarians about the bindings, and they're like, we really, he was so honest with these guys. He was like, hey, we really didn't see this as a library edition type thing. It was designed for retail.
yeah.
But that went back to the office and you guys started adapting. You also have your own library editions of books. And there's a difference here between what library binding is and library edition is for you guys. So if you want to
It
touch on
is,
that.
yeah. Thanks. I'd love to touch on that because I often do in the newsletters and conversations. So yeah, long years. I couldn't tell you when we began this, but um, we 20 years ago or more, we started publishing what we called library editions, and the word library in our mind at that time, it was the home library. So the concept was, uh, okay, well, these typically come out with comic books.
Right?
Here's 4 or 5, 6 comic books. Okay, then that gets collected into a trade paperback or perhaps a hardcover collection, also synonymous with graphic novel, right?
Right.
Um, and of course, then those build up. And so we thought, well, look, there's a lot of fans out there that love this stuff, and there's definitely a market for a little bit higher end compilations. So we started this what we called library, and the idea there with the word library was like it's for someone's library, their home library. It sits on the shelf, and it's less. It's more of a substantial book. So our library editions, we come out with many all the time, and they do not have library bindings per se. They have great
Right.
bindings, but they are really books that I really encourage librarians to look at stocking, because what are they? They are oversized hardcovers. They're typically 8.5 by 12, 9 by 12, something like that.
Right.
They always include at least one, typically more than one graphic novel within, um, along with extras. Those, of course, vary book to book, but those includes things like annotations by the creators, uh, sketchbook process sections, introductions, commentary, etc. Oh, and short stories, you know, that maybe were free comic book day issue or something that was never collected. And they're typically $40 or $50, cover price. And so price wise, compared to buying the individual books, they're, a little better value. And obviously for a librarian, while it's not a library binding as they define it, it is a good book to have on the shelf, because again, it's one book, perhaps covering instead of 3 or 4 or 2 or 3 paperbacks, you've got this one, and it has, like I said, a lot of extras and things that are particularly compelling for the fan looking to dive in beyond the story. So, and we have those come almost every month. We have some library editions come out.
Which are covered in the newsletter, right?
I'm sorry?
And they're covered in that newsletter.
They certainly are. They certainly are. I think, Avatar, the Last Airbender titles, that's a good example of how these work. Until, recently we started publishing some standalone self-contained story graphic novels from Avatar. But prior to that, pretty much our entire, almost our entire publishing history with Avatar was stories that took place over 3 graphic novels. They're like digest size graphic novels, retail for 11 or 12 bucks. And then the library edition is combining those 3. So AKA you have the entire story in one book, blowing it up, it's twice the size. And then, like I said, has extras, commentary,
content, yes,
from the creators of the show, etc. Yeah.
All right, so we're almost done here. I want to give you a few minutes to what have you got coming down the road? A couple highlights, if you want to throw something out there.
Sure. Well, a few things I'd point out, not coming down the road per se necessarily, but I just, as far as Dark Horse, I would mention also, obviously comics, graphic novels. That's our originating purpose and our main focus. However, in recent years, art books have been a big part of our line. Most of them dealing with video games.
Right.
Obviously, video games are big or bigger than movies at this point, and can drive a lot of interest among library patrons. So the art of Cyberpunk, the art of this, fill in the blank.
Right.
A lot of books like that. The best selling of those are related to Zelda. Those are, I would say, objectively, I would say those are must-have for libraries. Those are, Zelda Encyclopedia.
There's a huge fan base for Zelda.
I'm sorry?
There's a huge fan base for Zelda.
Yeah. And the sales of these books year after year after year just show, and they're kind of reference books / art books.
Sure.
So they're really of interest to fans. And of course, we do a lot of graphic novels based on those kind of properties too. Halo graphic novels, Mass Effect, Dragon Age, etc. So I wanted to mention that just as a plug for Dark Horse. I also want to mention we do some prose publishing. It's very selective, but a couple. I wanted to do a bit of a plug for some of that. Some notable titles where we published several novels by the author Yahtzee Croshaw. Mogworld, We'll Destroy the Galaxy for Food, or a couple to name. Very, very popular humorous science fiction author. Vampire Hunter D, we've published those novels for years. Those, of course, are inspiration for a long-running anime and manga. And like this year, we launched 2 fantasy trilogies. The Wizard King trilogy by Chad Corey, which has been doing very well received. And then also Cycle of the Red Moon trilogy by Jose Antonio Cortrina, who's a Spanish author, who's award-winning, one of the best, if not best-selling author in Spain, writing in fantasy in Spanish, has won all kinds of awards for in his country. And we this year we both launched English translations of the novels, as well as we're publishing them in Spanish too, which is at this time the only Spanish books we're offering. I would mention again, I'm looking back as opposed to forward, but I want to give a shout out to one of the few straight up kids books that we've published that was not a graphic novel, which was Daddy Daughter Day by a gentleman you may have heard of named Jeff Bridges and his daughter, his adult daughter, it is inspired by the games they played as kids, the imaginative games, and it's a really sweet book in the sort of picture book realm. So I want to give a shout out to that. And then upcoming, a couple. There's almost too many to note, but a couple upcoming books I just give a quick plug to coming out in the next couple months. One would be Earthboy. This is a new original graphic novel by Paul Tobin. Paul Tobin is a very prolific comics writer who, with us, has written a lot of things, but notably most of our Plants vs. Zombies graphic novels, which I don't think we've even touched on those. Those are based on a mobile, a video game, Plants vs. Zombies, and they are among our best-selling books ever. We sold millions of these. We're up to about 17 volumes, I believe, and these are for kids. I mean, these are middle reader or below, hilarious comics that are, we do have that market in mind. They're sort of digest size. They're hardcover. They're very affordable, like $10 books. And in any event, this is an original. And Paul's done all kinds of other things. Notably, Bandette is a series he does with Colleen Coover, which I highly recommend. That's more of a YA series about a teenage burglar. But Earthboy is this great new series he has coming, or a great new graphic novel that he has coming up that is featured in the newsletter that we sent out just before Christmas. And in that newsletter, I mean, we included a link to download an entire advanced reading copy of the book. There's another book for middle readers coming out, Gert and the Sacred Stones, which is a book that another sort of subcategory of things that Dark Horse publishes. We're very diverse. Are translated versions of books that were originally published in other countries. Of course, the opposite happens too. Our Dark Horse books are published in 100 plus countries around the world. But Gert and the Sacred Stones is a book from Norway that about a girl that has to try to save her village from they're at war with these mysterious forces, and in order to do this, she needs to become a warrior, which is not something girls can do in their culture, and so she works through that, and it's a great story. Themes of like, what are gender roles, what's appropriate, what does it mean to be a boy, be a girl, etc. So recommend that. And there's so many. Another, I would point out again, this seems like a kind of a librarian would be interested in this. Also coming out soon, we have a book called Drawing Lines, an anthology of women cartoonists. This is a new edition, so to speak, of a book that was published about 10, 12 years ago. And it's, an anthology of different short comic stories by women. Some notable names in that are Joyce Carol Oates, Gail Simone, Trina Robbins, Colleen Duran, Jill Thompson. Some great names. And of course, we're very proud to be presenting, work of women cartoonists, who are certainly doing better than ever, but have always been sort of underappreciated and underserved in the.
It's fun to hear you reference those women who are now veterans of the industry, and it's a really cool moment. And that actually, looking forward to that one. I remember the first editions of those, and the opportunity now to celebrate their efforts, their work over all these years is pretty phenomenal. Listen, we're about done now, and I want to thank you again, Mark, for coming in to talk today. This is Mark Bernardi with Dark Horse Comics. You can find all this great collection of Dark Horse Comics on Comics Plus from LibraryPass. I'm your host, John Shableski. Thank you for joining us today. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, John.